Welcome to the Lucky Orange Show, where we teach you how to unlock the potential of raw data and shape it into stories that grow your business faster. Let's get into today's conversation.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Lucky Orange Show. I'm your host, Sean McCarthy from the team at Lucky Orange. And today we're continuing our deep dive that we're doing all year long into data storytelling, finding a narrative and pattern in your data, and just getting more use out of those mountains of data that you are collecting. And so today we're taking a little bit of a different angle that we haven't yet so far this year, which is the idea of content marketing. Content marketing is everywhere. Content is everywhere, just like data. And so alongside with me today, we have Katherine Boyarsky from Datalily, formerly known as CXD Studio. They had, as she put it, a glow up last year into this beautiful brand. So Katherine Boyarsky, welcome. How are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Speaking of your awesome new website and brand, and I'm going to read this just so I get it right. There's a great headline on the website that says, content marketing rooted in data, lifted by creativity. And I've been thinking a lot about kind of this intersection of data and creativity, these seemingly opposing forces, but it sounds like Datalily is trying to marry them. Let's just start there. What do you see as the relationship between creativity and data?
Yeah, and I'm glad that tagline resonated with you. I was really excited. When I came up with it for the website, I was like, yes, this is exactly what we wanted. It's got like the, imagery of our brand in it. And so I'm glad it resonated. So my team, we have been working with the intersection of content and data for almost 10 years between the two of us, my business partner and I. My business partner is a designer. I am originally a content strategist and copywriter. But about 10 years ago, we worked with Owl Labs on their first state of remote work report. At the time, it was, hybrid and remote work were very new. Not many people were doing it. Owl Labs technology is for hybrid teams. And we wanted to find out kind of some benchmark metrics around how many people work hybrid, how many people work remote, what's kind of the landscape looking like. And with the team at Owl Labs, we put together this Google surveys. We put out this survey globally. We got the data, and I messed around in pivot tables to try and find some stories to tell with this data. And we put out this report. And it's ended up becoming their flagship piece of content. They've done it for the past 10 years in a row now. And it really opened our eyes to the value of being able to access that kind of data and tell marketing stories with it. There are so many use cases for that kind of content for a content team. You can put together a downloadable report, which is just a high quality lead gen piece of content. It also feeds into PR, media, getting links, organic traffic, social media campaigns, paid ads. It's just a really valuable piece of content to be able to work off of. And in general, there's been this shift over the past 10 years that we've been really excited to be part of, which is in the past, you think of a data report that's kind of like a, benchmark report, data report, industry trends report. You think of McKinsey, you think of Deloitte, you think of Forrester. And they're these very executive facing white papers. I mean, even just the naming of what we're even talking about here has shifted a lot over the past 10 years from, calling it a white paper, calling it an industry trends report, but any kind of proprietary research driven content and data driven content. And in this time, there's just been a lot more of a democratization of the data because like we did at Owl Labs, that was one of the first times I had been part of a marketing team that could source that kind of data ourselves. And with that in hand, it was we can kind of play with this. We can have fun with it. And we can think about it in more of a marketing way than necessarily just a purely data analysis way and tell some interesting stories and figure out the cross section of the data that's most interesting for the marketing team, also the product team. They're going to be interested in some of this data and thinking about what that means to be able to, help market a lot of SaaS businesses are the ones that are doing this because there's a lot of overlap between you're interviewing, let's say, marketing managers or leaders. And it's how are they working? How are they thinking? But also, how does that reflect with the ways that they can benefit from your product? So it has this really natural kind of combination to the research and data piece and the content marketing piece. And it's just kind of blown up over this last decade. And we've just been able to see so much fun data storytelling, and it's evolved a lot. And getting that research into the hands of marketers has been really, really successful. And so it's really, even though it's been around for a little while, it's becoming even more accessible now, and something that we're starting to see companies benefiting from. And it's not something that a lot of people are skilled in. So we've definitely seen how there's a learning curve. And when you do master that skill of being able to take a data set, run a survey, gather the data, and find the stories in it, you see so much benefit from it.
Yeah, I think the skill set side of this conversation is really interesting. The future of marketing almost necessarily involves a lot of data, just because that's where everything is heading. It's so easy to collect. But for somebody who is listening and says, yes, that sounds great, I'm tired of releasing things that aren't backed by data or informed by data or include data points in the strategy and the assets themselves, what would you say to somebody that wants to get more exposure to data and also better understand the ways in which they can manipulate it and ultimately turn it into content?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing I would suggest is to think about the data sources that you have access to. And that might be product data. It might be data that you get from surveys, so survey panel based data, or potentially like databases. Like we recently did a project with HubSpot where we analyzed pitch book data, which in the venture capital and startup space is a data set that most people don't have access to because it's very expensive to get pitch book data to have a subscription for them. So thinking about the sources of data that you may have, and then thinking about the use cases for that data in relation to the audience you're trying to reach. So if you have a product like Lucky Orange, you guys have tons of data in the product, and you're able to share things that are valuable for your clients by releasing some of that anonymized product data, with whether that's industry benchmarks, whether that's best practices. So thinking about who you're speaking to, and then how you can use data to tell a story that will be valuable to the person you're trying to speak to. And so a lot of the times that's a relationship between a marketer and a data person. So whether that's a data scientist, your data team, your product team is often someone that our clients will lean on. So, when we work on these big industry trends reports, it's usually a lot of different data sources that come together to be able to tell the story. So it's like, if we do a survey panel, that's really always very interesting to get benchmarks and get, in like trends and all that kind of stuff. And then we can compare that with product data. And then we also do interviews so that we can tell the more human side of the story. And how does that align with what we found from this survey panel? And it feels daunting as a marketer to get into data. Most marketers that I talk to and writers that I talk to are like, get me away from data. I never want to look at a spreadsheet in my life, which I feel that. Like when I started, I was in pivot tables for hours, calling my friends who are good at Excel, being like, please help me. I need to do a pivot table and find something out of this big, huge spreadsheet that looks like my eyes are just crossed looking at this right. spreadsheet. If you're not someone who has ever had any experience doing data, it looks like you're just looking at another language. You're looking at a sea of numbers where it's like, how could anyone possibly pull a story out of that? And so there's some basic principles of data that you have to learn. You have to learn how to understand, what does this chart tell me when I'm looking at it this way? You have to understand how to look at what is a crosstab. So this is my data set. And let's say we interviewed 1,000 marketers about what they're doing. But then we want to pull out that same question. Let's say we ask them, are you using AI? You can get the basic number of 50% of marketers are using AI. But then you can go a level deeper and say 50% of marketers are using AI, but 80% of marketers in SaaS are using AI when you look at it by industry. So there's certain principles of data analysis that you kind of have to learn as a marketer who wants to dive into this space, and understanding how to interpret, how to share the results in a way that's meaningful and valid. And a lot of that is with our team. I was doing a lot of this on my own from the beginning, just as someone who was interested in data, who had done some of it. But then we brought on 2 data scientists, and that has completely changed the game for us because there was a limit to my expertise and my skills in being able to pull information out of pivot tables and look at very large data sets and pull stories out of them. So we started working with these 2 data scientists who are both economists, and we actually are working on our own tool for marketers that's going to help marketers be able to more easily analyze and visualize data. And so, it's definitely a learning curve, but you start to learn over time with working with a data person, whether that's a data scientist, a data analyst, a product person, that how to get those stories and how to find those little nuggets of information out of a large data set.
Yeah. And I think you tapped into something that's interesting. It's like, I think traditionally marketers will get a statistic and say, there's my data point. That's the thing that I'm going to anchor this story around, and not be able to, for whatever reason, click in that further and find something that might be way more relevant for their audience. You're trying to kind of back into a story around a data point as opposed to finding what the real narrative is there. And I think that, you talk about the skill sets. It feels like we're interviewing for interns right now, summer marketing interns, and we're asking them a lot about how they feel about creative and writing and data. And kind of the default answer is, well, I'm taking courses that are a little bit of both. And I do think that the future of young marketers will likely have a lot of data involved. Now they still have to develop those skills, but it seems like it's a great career level up to just be willing to have that courage to say, 1, I don't know what I'm doing. 2, I want to get better at it. And 3, if you have an analyst in your team, go talk to them and go ask them and tap into them as a resource without being an annoying marketer and see what they can say to you. When it comes to using data and content, a narrative, how do you shift that into something that's interesting, valuable might be a better word, for the audience, and not just something that then resonates with the data geek that says, oh man, I can't believe you guys found this in the data? How do we turn this into something that's interesting for a piece of content?
It's a great question. When we think about creating a valuable piece of content that uses proprietary data, we have figured this out a lot over the years with our data team and our clients. And, there's after a lot of trial and error, we realized that the content marketing team needs to be involved from the very start of the data acquisition process. To have a data team who is focused solely on data sort of drive the ship up until the point of the data analysis being delivered to, let's say, a content marketing team to put together research. Sometimes there's just the way the question was asked didn't actually give us the result that's going to help us tell the story we want to tell. And I'm not saying to lie with statistics. That's not what I'm saying. But it's really, really helpful if you're let's say you want to do an industry trends report, and you're going to source a panel of survey respondents and you're going to put together a survey design. What we've started doing is getting everyone on the team who's going to be interested in using this data and getting it out to the right audience. Look at this. We create this background analysis doc that includes, who do we want this to reach? What's the goal of this project? And it also includes some potential questions that we may want to ask in the survey. What kinds of questions people are asking around these topics currently. It also includes potential crosstabs we may want to analyze. Are you going to want a regional cut? Are you going to want job roles? Are you going to want to see different company sizes? Like, how are we going to want to look at this data ultimately? Because we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions in the survey to be able to get that data. And then we brainstorm, what are the headlines or the press pitches or the stories that we want to be able to tell from this data set. And that usually gets the gears turning for a lot of the people involved, where a data scientist or a data analyst may not be thinking in that way. They're not thinking the same way as a marketer is thinking. They're thinking about running an effective research project. And so being able to kind of combine those skill sets and aligning on everything from the start is what has really helped to create these actually valuable pieces of research. And it's amazing how different the results are when a marketer kind of says, oh, you know what, actually, I would love to be able to say that 80% of marketers using AI are driving more, those companies are driving more revenue. So then we need to say, okay, well, we need to make sure to ask if they're driving more revenue, and we need to ask if they're using AI, and we need to ask what team they're on. So it's like a working backwards from the story you want to tell. And then, of course, once you get into the data analysis, you have to make sure that is the story in the data. Sometimes it's not, and we're like, well, shit,
Sure.
We thought this was going to be a great story, and it actually wasn't, or maybe they're not there yet. And so that has been probably one of the most valuable things, bringing in the PR team, bringing in the product team, bringing in the marketing team. If you're going to invest in a research survey or a research campaign like this, bring all those people in up front, get their 2 cents on the survey questions that you're asking and the ultimate goals of everything, and you will end up having such a more effective and valuable research campaign.
Is there pushback in that conversation, though, from the analysts that say, we have to maintain good science, and what you're asking me to do is ask leading questions or build this in such a way that we can 80% guarantee the outcome we want? Does that happen in that conversation where there's kind of an opposing force to the marketer and the PR yelling in the room? No yelling, of course.
Sometimes there's a limit as to how we can ask the question or what we can ask within the confines of the survey. But what we do is we have the marketing team come up with their kind of dream questions, just like ideas, like put out any ideas of any questions that you would want. And then our data team are the ones who design the survey using survey best practices. So they kind of data science-ify the survey questions, where maybe there's 2 question ideas we had where we can really combine those into a question. Maybe there's a question that really doesn't make sense. It's not going to actually give us good results. Marketers, we love a select all that apply. However, in the data analysis side, we love select one. Like marketers want to be able to get so much information, but when you actually think about the way that you're going to be analyzing and interpreting the data, there's a best practice for how you phrase a question. And sometimes it's like, there's really, like you said, there's limitations, there's data best practices where we do have to push back on the marketer and say, we can't ask this in that way. Here's how we can ask it. And that's why I really love working with a data team, because I trust that they know how to design a survey in the right way that's not asking leading questions. That's not a skill that I have as a marketer, to be able to design an effective survey. Even though a lot of marketers are kind of doing our best, there's a lot of AI tools out there now to help design survey questions. There's a lot of nuance in the survey design to be able to get quality data that you can then interpret in meaningful ways. But yes, we've definitely seen some pushback between teams, and usually we can find a happy medium to get the question asked and get the information we need.
Keep everybody happy to a certain degree.
Yes.
We're talking about surveying, and thus kind of along the similar lines of voice of the customer and feedback. And would you say that this more qualitative research sits at the core of a data-driven content piece? Or are there other data sources, quantitative things that, I realize there's quantitative that gets pulled out of the survey responses, but are there any other data sources that are typically brought to the table alongside something like survey responses?
Yeah. So the types of data that we've worked with and that are the most common in these types of marketing research campaigns are survey data to the general public, maybe survey data to your, as a SaaS company, let's say, your client base, to be able to compare how your clients are, your customers are acting or thinking in comparison to the general population. And then there's also platform data, which is really valuable to be able to share some benchmarks and some best practices and product data, whatever you can. Like, for example, we work with DoorDash, and they share, the most ordered foods on DoorDash or the most popular days of the week for consumers to order on DoorDash. So they have a lot of really great data, and it's based on so many people. So it's really valuable, and they can get really granular with locations and preferences. And then we also sometimes will work with like I mentioned earlier, like a database. And so like pulling data from something like a Bloomberg or a PitchBook. So like databases that you can pull from their already sourced data. And then we also combine that with interviews. And so that qualitative data from an interview with somebody who would be, a member of that target respondent pool is great to be able to get like quotes and actual stories of someone who has experienced what you're explaining through the data and giving it like that more human side of the telling the story. So we like to combine a lot of different data sources and try to share it in a lot of different ways because everyone kind of interprets things differently. So we try to incorporate, sometimes it's going to be a chart. Sometimes it's one big number. Sometimes it's a quote. Sometimes it's a big table of information that you just need, like email open rates by industry. Like sometimes that's the information that your audience just really wants and needs. So it's really dependent on kind of the piece of what you're putting together as a piece of content. Like sometimes your audience may be like an IT leader who's really interested in really granular data that is maybe not as interesting to someone else in a different category, but maybe they really want to know the exact like benchmarks for like with a Lucky Orange product, like, bounce rates or scroll depths or, somebody who's the director of web for a company, they really want those numbers. So, it's kind of, there's a lot. I would say the best thing is to have multiple sources, but no matter what, trying to tell these stories, it's best if you can, the more people that are from the audience that you want to talk to that would be valuable to them. So let's say, you have a client you have a company that is consumer facing, you want to interview consumers, you want to survey consumers. If you have a more professional audience and you can get that manager level, a lot of times we also do like to look at if we can get a more diverse respondent pool. We'd like to compare, what are the more junior level people thinking and saying versus the more senior executive level.
Sure.
To see those differences. So, as diverse as you can get is great, but then you also have to think about the size of the sample. And when you kind of cut it up, is there a meaningful number of people in each category? Or are you trying to get too much out of one small sample? Like if you have, that's something we work with our data team on to make sure that we have this, minimums for each, like once you start cutting up the data, do we have the right number of minimums in each category that will be meaningful?
Right. And you mentioned something earlier that kind of goes with that, which is, it is possible that you dump effort and resources into a big surveying project and you get things back and what you thought was going to be told isn't being told, or there's a different story that's in there. How do you handle that? Because obviously, if you're that far into the project, that can't be a dead end. It has to be a turning point. But what do you do in a project when the data isn't showing you what either you hoped or expected it would show you?
Yeah, this does happen. It really does. And we did one recently where we were doing a survey with a client where they had done the survey like 6 months ago. And they gave us this data and they were like, we've been sitting on this data. I think that's something you mentioned earlier, like how many companies are just sitting on data and not using it because they don't have anyone who has the skills to be able to turn it into something meaningful. So they kind of sent it to us. We're like, can you see what you can find with it? Let's see what we get out of it. And we were like, okay, we'll analyze it. We'll see what happens. And we were hoping that the data would tell us that, sales teams using AI, we're seeing a lot of benefits, we're saving a lot of time, we're doing a lot better. And it really was just not in the data. And we kind of had to pivot the story, which was that we realized that when the data was pulled, was when the survey was run, it was a little early for sales teams to be seeing these benefits from AI. And so what we kind of realized is maybe we can use this as a benchmark and do the same survey in 6 more months and compare and say, it's still pretty early. Teams are not as comfortable with these types of AI tools yet on the sales side based on the sample that we surveyed. And it just really changed. We had to kind of change our thinking. And then the stories that we were able to tell were just different. We kind of realized, sales teams that have documented best practices are outperforming sales teams without documented best practices. Let's lean into that a little bit and tell that story, because that's what we can tell from this data versus the AI story, which we really thought we were going to be able to tell. And so in that situation, it's kind of like there's a certain amount of having to, there's sometimes you cannot tell the story you were hoping to tell, and you have to just get what you can out of it, maybe use it as a benchmark and kind of pivot.
Yeah. I mean, for the listener, what Katherine just did there is show us exactly how creativity and data can work together. I mean, really what you're saying is we have plenty of data. Nobody's lacking data, but if it's not telling us the story that we were hoping to tell, what do we do? Well, creativity and the marketer brain comes out and says, well, maybe there's an alternative method here. Maybe we're at the front end of the curve, like you're saying. We need to come back around to this. It's not time yet. Or a multitude of other options, depending on the hyper-specific situation you're in, might call for a resurvey or an adjustment of questions or whatever it is. That's where the marketer creative brain at the table gets to shine. And again, it's funny. It keeps coming up where it's like, maybe an organization doesn't have the people with the skills to do this. If you're catching on to that theme, that means you can make yourself really, really valuable within an organization by exploring analytics, by exploring these tools, bringing them up, being proactive with it to say, well, what if I'm thinking about how our content marketing needs more data, because you listen to this podcast episode and then volunteer the fact that in the coming months, you want to inject more data into the content strategy. Kind of speaking to that, one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning was how data can inform and be content itself, but also inform a content strategy. It sounds like you guys are primarily focused on helping guide the deliverables that are data driven. Are you also working then on the content strategy as a whole and monitoring and reporting on that, driving a data driven content strategy?
Yeah, I would argue that every decision on a marketing team should be rooted in data. And it's actually my hot tip for everyone out there. It's the best way to navigate a conflict of opinion, especially in a creative project or situation. So let's say you have a landing page and we have two different creative opinions on which way we should go with how to design this page or how we should display the information. Or let's say we have a piece of creative, we have a social media post or an ad, something that's, going to have you're going to be investing in this, let's say. And two different people have two different opinions on the creative. We always just say, well, let's just go to the data. I mean, let's look at how this performs versus this, and we'll figure it out. And we'll go back to the data, because there's obviously a lot of subjectivity to creative work, and we all have so much access now to data. So everything should be rooted in data. And so one of the big things that our clients will come to us and say is, should this project, when we do this research report, be web-based, or should it be a landing page with a downloadable PDF? And it's a really hard question, because it kind of goes to your goals, the goals of the project, your resources on your end, your, there's a lot of things that go into it. If the project is meant for the primary goal of organic traffic, that's going to change our opinion. If the primary goal is lead generation, that's going to change our opinion to lean into more of the PDF download side. But it's something that a lot of companies have not really figured out yet, because somehow there's still a lot of there's still a learning curve and a growth curve in web-based report, like long form web-based content. There's kind of challenges sometimes with companies' CMSs and what they can support and all that. But we often say, let's analyze previous content. Let's see what is performing well for this goal for things that we've published before. What's performing well with benchmarks in our industry on what other clients are doing, what other companies are doing in this space. So every project is rooted in data. And we always, with our clients, we always do a deep dive about 6 months or even a year after a campaign like this launches to see the outcome. And it's incredible. I mean, you find out that we have it on our website that DoorDash's campaign influenced 6% of its audience to adopt their product, which was kind of an unexpected outcome. We were looking for, new downloads and landing page visits and all that stuff, but it actually influenced product activity. And you find out that the certain campaigns are reaching the number of net new contacts is over a third, which, like, the HubSpot State of Marketing generates about a 30% or more net new contacts each year, which for a company like HubSpot kind of blows my mind that they can bring in new contacts at all. Like, I thought they maybe had reached their cap, but like, that's something that's really interesting to look at. So every part of a research project or any kind of content marketing should absolutely be rooted in data. And so when we think about that data-driven strategy, it's how should we be publishing this? Where should we be promoting it? And all of that is based on data. And maybe what time of year should we be promoting this campaign? Maybe how many, like, what types of promotional campaigns and assets should we be doing? Something that's become really popular recently is webinars. So how many people attended the webinar? Are the webinar attendees better quality leads than the landing page downloads? There's all kinds of ways that you can analyze it, but it all comes down to who you want to target and the goals of your project. So we always think about that before we start any kind of project. It's like, that's the first question that we ask. We're not just going to go into a research project and have a client invest a ton of money when there's not a clear goal, strategy, some kind of data that we can work off of, and then something that we can measure as a measurable, that's obvious. It's kind of basic, but it's worth repeating always.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it should sit at the core of a lot of decisions. And I think there's a lot of people who agree with that and might find it hard day to day to get into that habit. But just like anything else, it is something that needs practice. It is something that needs repetition. And in some cases, there's an organizational shift that has to happen if you're collecting a lot of data that's sitting there, or you think you're using some of it, but you're not getting what you really need out of it. You're just passively looking at reports or whatever the situation is. There can be a culture shift that has to happen that says data can be a story. Much like when businesses want to start creating content, period, they say, well, what are we going to write about? Well, almost anything you're doing, of course, your business has a story, but almost anything you're working on and doing can be content. And there's a culture to build around that. So I continue to believe that people should fight for data in the conversation.
And I think it's a big barrier for a lot of companies that people get really caught up in the technical side of data and how they can prove the worth of the content that they're working on. There's like, I always just say, go back to basics. Like, if you don't have the structure internally to have really sophisticated reports that tell you the exact ROI and the revenue generated from a campaign and everything, use a UTM code and track how many people looked at it. Or if you really don't have the infrastructure set up to be able to see how many people, how many people your report influenced to use your product, like, do it downloadable and just count how many people downloaded it. And then you can hopefully be able to prove the value of that piece of content if you got a certain number of leads. Ask your sales team which content pieces or which leads have driven the best conversations, or the like, if they have gotten a deal recently that was associated with a certain campaign. Like, just don't overthink it. If there's we all, back in the day, we said, there were radio ads that said, mention this ad and you will get a discount. Like, just think about it in the simplest terms. I've seen a lot of companies get really caught up in feeling like they had to have super sophisticated reporting, and
that's totally right.
I mean,
and if you're too, like, what you're reporting on content for is to make subsequent decisions and investments and things. And so if you want to know if something is resonating, you're right. Go to the source, go to the people that are talking to the customers who are interacting with this content. And you don't need 5,000 conversations to say it's working. You can get a handful and then look into their account and see how they're performing and see if this has impacted it. There's a lot of ways to stitch stories together. We can't dismiss those things as being in the bucket of something like vanity metrics that we, maybe reach on something or whatever. Even that can be, should be at the table. So I think that opening up those conversations and being at the table and saying, we need to chase down a story here, and there's plenty of data to do it. A lot of what we're talking about is future focused, is talking about how we think there's data is, it's all around us and we need to make better use of it. As you look forward to the rest of 2025 in your space, what has you most excited?
It's a great question. One of the things I'm really excited about is the tool that we're building, which is something that is it's a labor of love. It's something we haven't really, it's a way for marketers to get more comfortable with data analysis. And I think that there's a lot of different tools out there, and no matter what, just getting that into the hands of more marketers is going to change a lot in the content space, where it's easier. And with AI too, I mean, there's so much there that can be helpful for data analysis. And I just think that that's the piece that I'm looking forward to seeing more people get into, and being able to maybe take a data set and find interesting stories from it, and not being as intimidated by data analysis, and kind of seeing that grow as it's growing as a field, kind of like we've said, the marketing, data, science worlds are really merging together into these new roles. I think in the HubSpot State of Marketing this year, one of the biggest roles that companies are hiring for is marketing data analysts. And I think that these new emerging roles and it's almost like a new way of thinking, and something that was really separate before. It was kind of like marketers lived in one world, data analysts lived in another world. There's a lot more interaction now. And I think that's exciting for me. I feel like this has been a space that we've been in for kind of a while, but there haven't been many people in this world. So come on in. It's not scary. We'd love to talk more about it, because it's something that is kind of a new space in marketing that has a lot of potential. So like you said, if you're kind of junior, or not even junior, but if you're interested in exploring this, like, raise your hand, because I'm sure there is a place for you to be able to grow in this space. And I'm sure there's someone who would be very happy to have you be involved in a project like this if you are interested in. It's kind of like, I would say there's a certain amount of curiosity, and it's like almost like a scavenger hunt getting into a data analysis that is, dare I say, fun.
I can hear our business analyst kind of hemming and hawing outside, saying, "What the hell is she talking about? I've been staring at this database for 10 hours." But
we got to make it more fun.
I know what you mean. Yeah, we do. That's where the visual representation of the data comes in, turning it into charts and graphs and making it something compelling and into a narrative. So
yes, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people to come for me and say this is not fun. But if you have that mindset of being someone who enjoys it, I always say it's kind of like during that process of doing a data analysis, and it's like you got to go down the rabbit hole, go down every rabbit hole and see which one produces something interesting. And if anyone, if you've been in content strategy and marketing, that's kind of part of the content strategy process. Like if you're doing, keyword research, and it's kind of like going into one keyword, seeing what all the related keywords are, what makes sense, and what's sort of telling a story. And I think that becoming a lot more accessible with different tools and different, different platforms, like being able to do more DIY or accessible survey panels and, things like that. There will be a point where this is going to be as basic of a skill as something like understanding SEO, which in the past was so technical, so overwhelming. And now it's a basic skill for any marketer. And in the future, I think the same thing will be said for data analysis.
Definitely. And I mean, a story backed by data can absolutely change the trajectory of a business. If you latch onto something and it separates you from the crowd and it's aligned with a successful content campaign and delivered in the right way, I mean, that can have a serious impact on a business. And so it's worth your time. And ultimately the content that you deliver from that data story and from that narrative will probably outperform anything that's just your opinion or that's just something creative to be creative.
I mean, yeah, we have a lot of data around the impact of these type of industry trends reports, and they generate a ton of revenue. So I can tell you that it's a worthy investment if you do it in the right way, and something that can be repurposed and reused for so many different use cases. Sales teams love this type of data. Product teams love these type of data reports. There's so much you can do with it beyond just the content marketing itself, which is already super valuable. And it's something that even if you're a small team, it's accessible now. You can run a survey for not too much money. There's a tool called Sentiment, CENTIMENT, that we love, that they're a professional facing survey panel. And you can run a survey for under, $5,000, get results, analyze them either in-house or with a partner, and put together a great piece of content that will generate your company more than $5,000.
There you go. Well, if somebody wants to track you down on LinkedIn or the website, where can they find you? I know you're active on LinkedIn, a lot of conversation going on there around this very topic. How can people connect with you?
Yes, would love to connect with you. Find me on LinkedIn, Katherine Boyarsky. Go to our website, datalily.com, DATALILY. We'd love to connect with you. And I would love to hear if anyone has questions about this stuff. Like, I'd love to share more on LinkedIn too, if you want to hear more. Amazing.
Well, Katherine, I know you're busy. I know the day is wrapping up. We're recording this on a Friday afternoon. So thank you for carving out time to chat. This has been excellent. It's a really, really exciting topic. And I think a lot of people are seeing this play out in their own world, being called to inject more data into their marketing, not just be paint by the numbers, boring old content. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. It was fun to chat.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Lucky Orange Show. Before we go, if you haven't tried Lucky Orange yet, head over to www.luckyorange.com for a free 7-day trial of our leading conversion rate optimization toolkit. What's in that toolkit? Well, let's start with session recordings and heat maps. With session recordings, you can watch a full playback of an entire visitor journey on your website. Everywhere they click, scroll, move, everything they do in your site, a full playback. So you can see what's getting in the way of conversions and what is getting people over that finish line to convert. With dynamic heat maps, you can see the average visitor behavior on a page. So you can see clicks, moves, and scrolls. You can see how far down the page the average visitor is scrolling. And if something is below that line, that means that more than 50% of visitors are not seeing that. Lucky Orange also offers tools like live chat, announcements, and surveys so that you can communicate with your website visitors in real time. So again, if you have not tried Lucky Orange, or if you're not a user yet, head over to luckyorange.com. Check it out, 7-day free trial with no credit card required. If you're a Shopify store owner, head over to the Shopify App Store to download the Lucky Orange app to your store today, as well as BigCommerce, HubSpot, Square, and many more. Check us out, and happy optimizing.